Yamato Meru Gangu Nin Di Kang Thoi Ngu Ngu Di Kang Kang La Kang Ai Kang Ai Kang Ai. What happened during those hours when I sat in the fishing boat and waited for my father to return? Were they hours or only 1 hour, or 1/2 of 1 hour? It was after sundown. We were escaping, so we needed darkness. But I don't remember darkness, and I don't remember light. I was waiting in the boat, and the boat filled with people. But I remember no one other than my father. He walked slowly toward me, gently pushing everyone else aside. He picked me up and kissed my hair. He stroked my face and rocked me, even though I wasn't crying. The boat must have cut into the water as it pulled away from the shore. But I don't remember the sound of the water, and I don't remember the shape of the shore. Is this because of the darkness? Or is it because we didn't turn around once to look at the lights of our town? My father stared ahead at the stars and at the moon, which was half full and half vanished. That first night at the refugee camp in Singapore, we lay in a hammock outside trying to sleep. I had closed my eyes to the moon and was listening to the sound of the crickets, a hum that would stop and start at odd intervals. Amid these darting sounds, I began to make out one other, the sound of someone crying. Soon the sound seemed so constant that I pictured a flood of tears rushing toward us. I thought that if the tears touched us, my father and I would spill out of our bodies, dissolve, and fall through the netting of the hammock. Frightened, I opened my eyes and stared hard at my father's back. When I touched a finger to his spine, he curled upon himself like an anemone. It was then, as he pulled away from me, that I realized the crying came from him. The hammock tilted toward the ground. The crickets went quiet. A dark cloud crossed the face of the moon, and time stopped. Time stopped. Then, inexplicably, incredibly, it continued. In 1978, an elderly couple in San Diego decided to sponsor, through their church group, 5 young Vietnamese men and 1 6-year-old girl from a refugee camp in Singapore. Mr. Russell was a retired Navy man. He had once been stationed in the Pacific and remembered the people there as being small and kind. When Mr. Russell heard about the Vietnamese boat people, he spent many sleepless nights staring at the ceiling and thinking about the nameless, faceless bodies lying in small boats, floating on the open water. In Mr. Russell's mind, the Vietnamese boat people merged with his memories of the Okinawans and the Samoans and even the Hawaiians. One night, Mr. Russell fell asleep and dreamed that the boats were seabirds sitting on the waves. He saw a hand scoop the birds up from the water. It was not his hand, and it was not the hand of God. The birds went flying in all directions across the blinding blue sky of Mr. Russell's dream. But finally, he saw them fly in only one direction, and that was toward the point where in the dream he understood himself to be waiting, somewhere beyond the frame. The original plan was that my father, the 4 uncles, and I would live with the elderly couple. But as our papers were being processed, Mr. Russell died, and there was some question as to where he would be sent, where we would be sent. Tokyo, Sydney, Minneapolis. Mr. Russell had told Mrs. Russell his dream about the birds. After his death, she considered the dream and decided that we should move in with their son, Melvin. Ba said it was no one's fault that we lasted only one season at Mel's place. When Mel approached us at the airport, we heard a faint rattling, a ring full of gold and silver keys hanging from his belt. With each step Mel took, the ring swung and rattled by his side. The keys were new to him. Mel was tall and thin, but the ring looked fat, important. Mel caught the ring and pushed it into his pocket. This silenced the keys for a moment. He shook everyone's hand, including mine, and laughing nervously said, "Welcome to America." He then waved his hand in the air, and when I followed it with my eyes, I saw a poster of a man and a woman at the beach, lying on striped towels, sunning themselves between two tall palm trees. Above the palm trees were large block letters that looked like they were on fire. Sunny San Diego. The man was lying on his stomach, his face buried in his folded arms. The woman was lying on her back, with one leg down and the other leg up, bent at the knee. I looked through the triangle formed by the woman's tanned knee, calf, and thigh, and saw the calm, sleeping waves of the ocean. My mother was out there somewhere. My father had said so. So, that passage is from Sita, and I met a student this evening named Min. Is he around? Ah, there you are. So Min asked me about the end of Sita, and so Sita is the first chapter in Gangster, and it's the father's pronunciation of the word stop. Okay, and I had considered many different ways to sequence the chapters of Gangster, and I decided to go with Sita because I wanted an English language reader to first encounter this word, right, which is not right, right? And I wanted people to understand that I was going to break the language to do something else through this language. And in Sita, there's a paperweight, and there's a butterfly trapped inside the paperweight. And the girl is obsessed with getting the butterfly out. And I thought I would like to read from the ending of Sita. So, Sita is also about the way in which Mel and his mother kind of inherit these refugees, right? And they don't know what to do with them, right? So they put them to work, they paint houses for them, they take them to church, so there's like this whole project of how to domesticate these people or turn them into Americans in a certain way. At the same time, Mrs. Russell there's also this cabinet of glass figurines that she collects of little animals, right? And so at the end of Sita, the girl figures out how to get the butterfly out of the paperweight. Okay. She sits in a swivel chair at Mel's desk, and she's spinning around and around in circles. And when she stops, she sees this picture frame, this picture of the family, the Russells. And the picture is intact, but the frame is broken. And that's how she gets her idea to throw the paper away. Okay. I stood up from the picture and looked around the room. The room felt crowded. Messy stacks of paper were crammed into the shelves. Half-empty boxes of books lay at odd angles on the floor. Having been pushed one way and then another as Mel made his way around, my eyes scanned the four walls of Mel's office before settling on the space between the glass display cabinet and the wall near the door. I walked up to the space and measured it with my hands, pressing first one palm and then the other flat against the wall. Keeping my eye on the space, I backed away from the wall until I was standing beside the desk at the center of the room. I took the disc from my shirt pocket and cupped it in one hand. I rocked it a little, feeling its weight in my palm. The butterfly lay in the disc. It was motionless, like someone expert at holding his breath or playing dead. I held the disc up to my ear and listened. My heart was beating and wouldn't be quiet. I held the disc at arm's length, shook my head, and then brought the disc back to my ear. There, very faintly, was the sound. It was like a light, almost transparent curtain rippling across a window. I tightened my fingers around the glass disc, swung my arm as far back as it would go, and aiming for the center of that small space, a space the width of 3 hands, I skipped once and swung my arm forward, letting the disc fly. The disc flew hard and fast, but not where I had sent it. It crashed through the glass doors of the display cabinet. The animals' knees buckled. As they fell, some of the animals lost their heads, while others' bodies broke in two. The broken bodies of some protected the bodies of others from shattering completely. Some lay on their sides, staring out the window. The disc hit the back of the cabinet, bouncing off the china before shooting back out into the room. Mel's office filled with the sounds that animals make. Ba and the uncles threw open the door. I spun in the chair, my eyes scanning the ceiling for the butterfly. Sho-sho, sho-sho, sa-top, sa-top, sho-sho, sho-sho, sa-top. Okay. So I'm going to transition from this moment into the installation because I recognize now, reading it, what I was doing with those animals, you know, and how I was trying to kind of convey the degree of violence that had been experienced and borne by so many people in this story, right? And one way to kind of address it is to not address it directly and to slide it onto some other bodies, right? But I want to go now to the installation because, you know, early on, one of the earliest poems I wrote about Vietnam was to say that it's not a war, right? And I think that I had to do that in order to write Gangster, because I needed to say, whenever we approach Vietnam only as a war, we never actually have Vietnamese people alive and loving and living. You know, they're only there to die. So I needed that. I needed to make that space for myself to love in front of strangers, you know, my own family history, and to love it in a complicated way. But the longer I've been in the U.S., and the more that the U.S. has been engaged in wars, the more I feel like I have had to make my way back to that war, on my own terms, of course, but still, you know. So I want to show you this piece. I've been working on a novel that is of Gangster, because in Gangster the war is largely off the page, right? So there are these huge silences, and what I'm working on is a novel that writes into those silences. So I don't know a work in poetry for a gallery, like, you know, just putting up, like trying to animate space, you know, use poetry in a space. And initially I thought I'll just have, like, in a space like this, I'll just have a little headphone and you can listen to me read a poem. And I had been working on a series of poems about these young women who had served on the Ho Chi Minh Trail during the war, right? And I was looking at this arc of going from a girl to becoming a woman, even as the nation itself is coming into nationhood, right, in the modern era. So I was working on that, and I thought I'll just have a little bit, do a reading. And this was actually the space. I thought I'll just take that little 2-foot space and have a little headphone. And then I started to think about it, and I decided that I wanted to actually try to get the novel I had been working on onto the wall, into the space. So I ended up going from what initially was that 2-foot space. I took up all of this space. So this is 18 feet, this is 26, this is 19, right? So I said, oh no, just give me 2 feet. And then I took all of that. So the novel I've been working on is looking at the killing of Emmett Till and the My Lai massacre, right? So the Till killing happened in 1955, in August of 55, and the massacre happened in March of 68. And the thing that connects them is that they were both documented photographically, not Till's killing, but Till's funeral, right? So Emmett Till was an African-American youth, 14 years old, who went from Chicago to Mississippi to visit his mother's family in Money, Mississippi. And while there, he was accused of whistling at a white woman. And for that, he was lynched, basically, dragged out at night and killed. And there's a story that Emmett Till stuttered, and that his mother had partly taught him to whistle to help calm his tongue, okay? So in the story of Till, there's not much of a before. Like there's this sense that he's a sacrificed son, right? And there isn't a before. And I want to, like, you know, when we think about the history of Vietnamese Americans, if you have no sense that people lived and loved, then you have no sense of the weight of what it means for them to die, right? So I wanted to have a sense, or try to convey a sense of Emmett Till before he was sacrificed, before he was killed in Mississippi. So the piece begins with a poem of Till, and these were some colors that we were playing around with to convey the Mississippi. So I'll put this up. This is a tracing of the Mississippi from St. Louis out to, out to the Gulf. And that's my friend John Belanger painting the Mississippi. And what's significant about the tracing is that of all of the tributaries that feed into the Mississippi, the 3 that involve Emmett Till. So Emmett Till was killed and thrown into the Tallahatchie, which is Choctaw for a river of stones. The Tallahatchie feeds into the Yalobusha, which means little tadpole. And then the Yalobusha feeds into the Yazoo, which means river of death. And the Yazoo feeds into the Mississippi, which is the Great River. Okay, so I only pulled up those tributaries, right? And we put up the names of those rivers to get like a non-English, right? This is Choctaw, so you're aware of another presence within this history, within this geography, okay? All right, so when you enter the gallery, you come across this poem and you see this river tracing. August in Mississippi. August in Mississippi, a stuttering boy sang Mississippi, whistling his way through the word, whistling in order to make his way through the word. He is on the train, no. He is on the bus, no. He is a boy much beloved by his mother. She saved up to send him from Chicago to Mississippi, that long-lettered, faraway place. He is going to the land of so many, so many, so many S's. By train whistle down he goes, our Emmett, 14-year-old, beautiful, hazel-eyed boy, riding the train whistle down. Bye now, Beau. She doesn't need to say, behave yourself. He is her pride. He is her boy. He is her boo. He knows he is carrying the both of them now. Inside the whistle she taught him to sound. So many, so many, so many S's. Okay. So this is, I'm going to show you quickly a series of slides that have to do with the formation of the piece. This is a list of the names of all of the villagers who were killed in My Lai, okay? And it's their names, age, and gender, right? And they're often clustered in family groupings, okay? So this is a list of them. And I have had this list and read these names for many, many years. This is a diagram of the evolution of writing in Vietnam, okay? Going from the characters to num to the Romanized alphabet, okay? So I was using this, I have had this for years and have looked at this pattern for many, many years. And so I was using this partly to guide my development of the installation. This is a pattern from a piece of paper that we burned after my mom died in Vietnam, right? So this is my last fragment of this pattern. So what I did was I took that list of names and I took that pattern and I wrote the names on pieces of tracing paper, and then I made a pattern for each person, right? So, and for each person, I chose a color and I made them a pattern, like I said, you know, like, this is for you, yeah? Okay. And so when you go to look at the piece, you see the number and the gender. You don't necessarily know what it is, but that's what's horizontal, and then you have to turn your head to read the names. So again, like Satop, there's a degree of disorientation required on the part of the viewer to approach this, okay? It takes time. Yes, you know, so here, Hoa, 10, female, right? So it's like each one is named. And again, like this is to go back to that whole notion of like, we're not just names, we're not just numbers. And yet we are names, we have names, and we have ages, and we have, you know, and so it's that process of what it means for me to go back and deliver these names, like to say, try to say these names, try to read these names, right? Appreciate the age. So this is making the piece. And the process of making it, like I say, you know, writing the name, wrapping it up. And this is the rigging. This is how we put it up. The names are placed like this. Okay. So in the Till image, what you get is Till in the coffin, right? At his funeral, his mother insisted on an open casket. She wanted the world to see what she had to see, okay? In the images of the My Lai massacre, Ron Haverhill's images, the most famous is the one of the villagers lying on along the ditch of the ravine, right? And a ravine is a geological body where like a strong force of water had to have come through at one time to force this going, okay? So what I was trying to do conceptually was to bring a river in one country through a ravine in another country to get these bodies off the ground, right? Okay, so you come in, you read the Till poem, you walk along the Mississippi, and then you, right here's the gallery, you're walking along. Oh, so this is going back to the notion of the stutter, right? This is song, right? Sangwan song, which means river song, okay? So it's just the accent, right? Okay. This is the Till poem. You come in, you move along the river. And now in that, remember that 2-foot space I told you about? That's the hinge. And in this space, there's a quote from William Calley, who was a lieutenant who participated in the massacre. He says, quote, "We weren't in My Lai to kill human beings, really. We were there to kill ideology that is carried by, I don't know, pawns, blobs, pieces of flesh. And I wasn't in My Lai to destroy intelligent men. I was there to destroy an intangible idea, to destroy communism. I looked at communism as a Southerner looks at a Negro, supposedly. It's evil, it's bad." Okay? So, after that, when you turn that corner, this is what you see, okay? And this is red dirt that's very similar to the dirt in My Lai. So you see this dirt, and you see these names, which you don't know yet are names, because they're distant. And from the Calley quote, so from this quote, I extracted this text, which is in the voice of the villagers, like a choral text, okay? And they say it's the tang of an idea, the tell. Supposedly we were not there, we pieces of flesh, we pawns of the real. We looked in and out of Meilai. We saw beings carried by beings in and out of Meilai, right? So this is the text that came out of Cali. So it's the idea is like, can you actually go into a piece of writing that was so blind to the reality of, right, and extract from it something that is in the voice of what's denied. So these are the pieces up. Right? So you have to enter in and they, because they're very light in their coloring, they float. Like they do get off the ground. Yeah. So, yes. So let's leave it there. You know, an audience to go from one side of a wall where they're looking at something that they're ostensibly familiar with or they've heard about, like the Till story, right? And can identify Chicago and Mississippi and then go around a corner and be in another country, right? That is the physical experience of the person moving through the gallery. And that is by design. It's like, why is it that only we have to talk about how we arrived, you know, here? As if the history here didn't impact how we came here. Do you know? So it's like trying to bring these different histories closer together so that we can at first get dizzy, but then see more clearly the intricacies of time and place. Yeah. There's a wonderful book called Mississippi Faulkner, and it's by a writer named Edward Gleason. And in it he says, place is the seam of time. You know, that when you go to place, it's like you pull the thread of time. And that's partly what I was trying to do in this piece, that thinking about the river is not a river, it's a thread, you know, and if it bleeds, if you pull it, where does it take you, and where does it tilt you into? Yeah. All right. So
the work that you have shown us talks a lot about just having a story that you're already ready to tell, but I'm curious about how do we access these stories in the first place? So I want to read this line from Nothing Ever Dies by Vietnamese Students.
yeah.
Voice and humanity in victimization are not enough to fully comprehend what happened back then over there. The aporia of the past always remains, the absence that I can neither know or share, the silence that resists my speech, the ghosts who refuse resurrection. So the first generation of Vietnamese Americans often carry these traumatic stories about their escape journey. And I guess for my friends, whenever they want to ask their parents, it's there's a little bit of guilt because your parents may want to bury that past away. So how do we go about asking them about their story, and how can we as the younger generation fully understand the difficulties that they went through?
Yeah, softballs, huh, Cathy? Yeah. I think that it's important to remember that you're asking because you want to be closer. I guess it's the ask is an approach. And that it's a part of your own history. You need to know, how did you get here? You got here through people. People carried you here. You know, you were carried here, right? And people were themselves carried in order to carry you. So you want to know what the lineage of that, you know, carrying is. You have a right to know. But everything in due time, right? we all know that even if our parents didn't say anything to us, we absorbed a lot of their story in the silences. And we absorbed a lot, we put a lot together in between what we knew and what we picked up, right? So we're piecing together things all the time. And we have to allow, I think in every kind of traumatic, wherever there's trauma, you have to allow that you cannot look at it directly. And that, and that it takes time to unfold. And that it only arrives, like people can only unpack those things as they feel more secure themselves, as more parts of them arrive. Do you know? So, yeah, and I feel like it's a very complicated question because it's actually a dynamic amongst each other. We need things from each other, without which it would be very hard for us to understand who we are and where we are, right? But it's also that we need it because we're trying to secure a place for each other, So it's not that like I just feel it's very important, like when you attend to somebody, like you want them to be comfortable. You want to feed them food that they like. You want, so it's like a way to know your parents better, is to actually try to get a sense of who they are. And even who they were before you. That's very important. It's like, remember I was talking about till, like trying to confer a before, if I could even do that. All of us are entitled to a before of however we've been framed, So every mother was not born a mother, do you know? Like every person is entitled to, like before you knew them, right? And so to return to some extent their wildness or their, because they have sometimes we domesticate ourselves for each other. Certainly parents do. They say like, I will sacrifice myself my whole life for you. But that's a huge burden for children. Do you know? What we all need is to live. Like we want more life, right? And we want to live together. We want to be alive together. That is the miracle. And it's a freaking miracle. Do you know? So that's what we want. Like when we want to know people, it's like, be alive with me. Who are you? So I guess like I would frame it that way, like that you want to know, like, who are you? Partly so that they might know who you are. And it's so important because otherwise things get set, like it doesn't matter who I am. You go, and it's like, then you get sacrificed. Your generation, the children get sacrificed, right? On some level. And it's it's not, that great Vietnamese expression, diễm, right? It's like, divide the sorrow. It's like, parse it out. I think there's a way in which like, yeah, but how do we build the joy? Like, by addressing the sorrows. Like, how do we by addressing them, how do we allow ourselves to build like what is joyous too, Yeah, it's very important though. It's very important. And to keep trying, to keep trying. And that the story, like what you understand of your story keeps changing. So what they understand of their stories also keeps changing. It's not like it's set. There are things people are holding, then when they think you're ready, they'll tell you. But it isn't as if it's set though. I think they keep evolving too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then my next question, so there's a poem by the Vietnamese American poet Bao Phi.
Yeah.
And so the poem is called April 30th, 2014. And in one of the lines, he says, "To say the past is bloodless privilege."
Okay.
So again, like it can be difficult for future generations to understand the plight that our parents went through after like the Fall of Saigon. So when, if ever, is the past like considered the past, like many generations from now? And like what is the youth's responsibility to remember these stories of pain? Or like, in other words, how do you imagine the future, like when we observe Fall of Saigon, like what would that look like? When
In the future.
yeah, when generations are so like detached from this war.
Well, we have the images, of course, right? The whole way that we approach like the memory of the war in Vietnam in the US is deeply problematic. Deeply, deeply problematic. So oftentimes the Fall of Saigon is framed as like the, you know, the final curtain falling. And if you think about like, you know, that war is a war that the US lost. But for the Vietnamese who became refugees, those folks lost a whole country, like a whole, you know, so it's like the waves of how we approach that moment, that memory. I think that the past is never past. I believe that strongly. It's badly buried. And it exerts its pressures, right? Because it's badly buried. It's not resolved. It's not, I mean, look, in this country, folks are still talking about the Civil War and why that was fought and what the implications of that were, right? So I think when we look at the Fall of Saigon in the future, I hope that we will be able to consider it as a moment in many different stories that continued, right? It's a day, a pivotal moment, but in stories that continued, you know, and on very many different threads, right? For the Vietnamese who stayed, for the Vietnamese who left, right? For US military who saw, like what, and it continued, right? And then you think about what unfolded in Cambodia, all of it, like I just think like the region, right? So I hope that like that day doesn't get to be packaged, that we keep troubling it so long as like it asks us to look, to continue to look. I think that is the complication of history. So as you get further from the moment, you actually have to ask more about what are you not seeing, right? As you get further, yeah. Like I think that the idea that that's set and we know, clearly we don't. Like the deeper we go, the more complicated it gets. And we're responsible to that complexity because that's where human lives are. Human lives exist within complexity, right? Ideologies develop when we try to simplify that, you know, and we slot people here and there. But it's within complexity that we cross all kinds of boundaries and borders, and our history is complex, you know. Yeah, so I think this whole period of, you know, history in terms of US and Vietnam and the region and the Vietnamese and the Cambodia, like all of that, I feel like very hopeful that it's your generation that will consist on this complexity and will help us to remember these chapters differently. Yeah, so I actually have a lot of hope about the future, that I think that as we hone these tools of approach and framing and consideration, then that we will actually bring more to bear on how we see and feel and look at things. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can do a Q&A now, but do you want to take over?
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying very clearly, because when I first got back from Vietnam after the war as it happened, I had a lot of problems.
Yeah.
But now I live there and, you know, I see people as people and I disregard governments. However, you were talking about My Lai. My first trip to My Lai was back in 1989. At that time, it was still, they had the markers where the houses were. Now they don't. They touristized everything. Second trip back, I went back there. But I found it speaking to a 12-year-old survivor from Yale, who was taking cover in a root shelter. I went back, because I was taking pictures at that time for National Geographic. And I went back, took a picture of her, went to give it back the next year, and she was in Canada. But when I went there and talked to the survivors, and being an American veteran, it was like, what did we do? Why? And there was a lot of questioning on our government, our government and governments in general. So when I go there now, I don't watch CNN, Fox, or anything like that. When I go there, I live there. But when I don't even have a TV, because I'd much rather watch a Vietnamese soap opera, which I don't understand, than listening to what's going on here in the States. But you have the right attitude. You have to separate people from events in a way. But you do have to remember the events happening.
Of course, and the events happen for political reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to separate, kind of the question of politics from all of this, because, I mean, in a deep way, to me, politics is about anything that you tell someone to look at. Politics is a reflection of your values, right? I mean, so when I write a scene, I'm saying, pay attention to this. That's political,
Yeah, I know.
right? So part of what happens on the level of ideology is you can do something to people and say, like, I wasn't there to kill people. They just, oops, they're dead, right? So that's an ideological, like, explanation of murder, right? And you somehow can just gloss that. So, yeah, like, I think what we're retrieving from history is people. It's the reality that history doesn't happen. War doesn't happen to, like, in an abstract way. It happens to specific people in specific places. Go find them. Go to the place. Go read the residue. And trauma is the residue, basically, right? When we say, like, we want to know, that's partly what we want to know. We want to know, what are we breathing in? What have we breathed in? What have we been born to? That's what we want to know, right? And it's a ghostly thing in some ways. In other ways, it's not ghostly at all. It's like right in your face, right? But to tease history out is to do so on all those levels. Yeah. Are there questions or comments or
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Thank you for coming today. How do you deal with, I guess, the issue of censorship? So I know that, like in Vietnam, like even certain books written by like Vietnamese or Vietnamese parents, there's a ban like in the country. So how do you like deal or address censorship in your books?
So there was this possibility, and evidently it's still in the works, that Gangster is going to be translated into Vietnamese and published in Vietnam. Initially, the Women's Publishing House in Hanoi, they wanted to start a new line of Vietnamese American works that they translate to Vietnamese. And I asked them, when I went to meet the editor, I said, how are you going to translate, how are you going to have this be available in Vietnam when they don't talk in Vietnam about why Vietnamese are in America, really? Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, you don't really talk about the Civil War, so how are you going to talk about why these people got on a boat and went, and so she's like, don't worry about it. We just say, it's not political. The book's not political. It's just about women and children, right? And I thought, that's funny. That is the funniest thing. That is the funniest thing, right? But what happened was, so I was traveling in Vietnam that same year. And then I was at an art gallery in Saigon, and I did a reading, right? And I did a little excerpt from my performance, Mohed Allah, And the guys in the cultural police, they found out about it because I had done an interview and it was in the paper, and they read it in the paper, but I had already done the event. And so they were very like, what was that, you know? And they called the gallery director and they said, we want to talk to her, like, what is this that she did, you know? And I was very nervous to see them, you know? So I had to go and see these two guys from the Cultural Bureau at Rita's Cafe. It was like my bad date with the cops, you know? and so, and I said to them, you know, my Vietnamese is not good, so, but I said to them, I'm sorry, I don't really speak Vietnamese. So they couldn't really quiz me, you know? And then, but then one of them said, like, what is Mohed about, you know? And I said, I'm sorry that you didn't come and see my work, because then you would know my work is not political. It's just about women and So, to go back to your question of censorship, I could not work in Vietnam. I wanted to, that was something I considered. I thought maybe I could go back and be there for some part of the year and think about, but I can't. I could not work there because I would just be, not less for myself, but for my family there. Like, it's kind of like the exposure that I would feel that I was subjecting them to by my own work, and also that I couldn't be honest. I just couldn't, like, if I did an interview, someone says, what do you think? You know, I couldn't say, like, I think that, you know, the government's not worthy of the people, and especially the young people. I couldn't say that. You know, I could say that here. I still think it's true here too. But, you know, like, so I just felt really like I cannot work. I just can't. And that was crushing. Like, I was like, I thought I could kind of fake it, but I was like, no, I can't. Yeah.
I had an experience there in which I was taking pictures, and I saw this guy following me around. He was a police officer.
Yes.
Because I was there on a journalism visa.
Yes.
And he's following me around in Hanoi or Hue, I forgot which one. But I stopped, I went up to him, I go, would you like to join me for coffee? Because I'm going, or I'll tell you where I'm going to be going. I'm not doing anything illegal.
And he became your friend?
No, he said, no, he can't.
We can't.
He can't.
I have a job to do.
Yeah, I understood that he had a job to do,
Yeah,
but I had
yeah,
a job to do it. But
yeah.
I wasn't taking pictures of anything military.
Yeah.
You needed a government visa for that.
So, respectfully, sir, what is your name?
Howie.
Howie.
Yeah.
Howie, I'm gonna ask you to hold on to what you're gonna say, and I will
That was
visit with
basically it.
I'll visit with you after.
Okay.
But I should like to find out if other folks have questions while we're here. Come on! I drove through pouring rain.
Oh, actually,
Joy, I can't do that.
you.
No
you
fair.
guys-
No,
Peter,
no,
that's
go ahead,
cute.
go ahead.
Well, yeah, your call.
Yeah, I guess my question was thinking about the installation and also that Gangster. It seems that a lot of your work is really playing with geography and the unboundedness of geography. And my reflection I had while I was reading Gangster is that the ways in which you're talking about Vietnam are thinking about it as like a mobility that like is moving through all of these different spaces. I was just wondering if you could speak more to how you're thinking about, maybe just speaking more to how you're thinking about space and how people are experiencing space.
Yes. Well, I'm very interested in the idea of inheritance, and that we inherit one another because of these histories. And that when someone shows up, as people are showing up on, in borders all across the world, and certainly, it's like they bring, right? It's like that wherever they came from is now at your doorstep. Because, like I was saying, it's like people in place, and when people are displaced, a bit of that place goes with it. There's no other way, right? Because people can't they are uprooted, they are displaced, but in order to stay alive, they have they have to dig deep into their own ground because now they're carrying it. So to me, I'm very interested in the way in which then they change the places where they arrive, just because they're alive. And right, so it's like that's just how it goes. It's just like if two people have a conversation, they risk actually finding out who the other person is, right? So I'm very interested in things not staying fixed, either whether it's an idea or and maybe I had to arrive at that for myself because I was thinking, because I came up in a family where I felt like Vietnam was in the house, but when you stepped out of the door, it was gone, right? So I could feel like in my own house, my parents were in full bloom, and you step out of the house and they were just shadows. And how did that happen, right? So seeing that, experiencing that, right, has made me feel very aware of like when I encounter someone and in whatever space I encounter them, to what degree are they able to be? And then in a larger social sense, like I think, how accommodating are we of these differences as a society, you know? And all this talk about walls and like, you know, the kind of arbitrariness of who gets asylum, whether even people can apply for asylum, which is not, asylum is a principle. It's not about like, no, we got too much, you know, it's not like that, it's not negotiable like that. And yet we're kind of like saying like, we're putting it into like like, no, we can say we have too much. It's like, yeah, like too much justice. You know, you get tired of too much justice. Like, do you know? So the notion of mobility also has to do with flexibility of recognition and perception, right? And like the degree to which we don't know what's possible, or we don't know the people right beside us, or yeah.
Other questions? There's one hand over there. Yeah.
I haven't read the book, but I would assume that you draw from your personal experiences or from those you know.
Yeah.
So how do you walk the boundary between respecting their privacy, what they're telling you, and portraying an authentic experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the book is drawn from my life. So there are autobiographical moments in it, but I kind of use them as points of departure, as opposed to like, you know, the work is trying to get it down. I start with something that happened and I leave, and I'm interested in the liberties of fiction. I'm very interested in that. So people will say, wait a minute, you have sisters and brothers and like, they're not in here. And like, and yeah, so there's because the work is so intimate, there's a tendency to read it as strictly autobiographical. Having said that, I felt very committed to the houses, the labor, like all the jobs the parents have, my parents had, right? So in many ways, it's like this book is announcing my parents' arrival, right, into this country, among like people who take care of your lawns or cook your food at the restaurant. It's like that, right? And I was faithful to certain details of my parents' meeting and stuff, but not all. You know, my father was like, but I thought this book's about me, and how come I'm not on the cover? You know, and so it's like it's a little funny for him in a certain way, where it's like I think that he probably feels like I don't remember everything in this book. He actually said that to me, and I said that's because it's fiction, Dad. Like, you know, yeah. But I mean, like I felt like I could approach my parents' story more, but not my siblings. I didn't feel like that was mine. You do know what I mean? So there are things that, Or I thought if I had written this as strictly as a memoir, it wouldn't be this way at all. It just wouldn't be. And I'm not interested to do that. I'm much more interested in fiction. Yeah. So I try to stay true to the spirit, but not to the facts, really. I think that there's a truth in fiction, and I feel really ruthless about. I'm respectful, but I'm not loyal. I'm not faithful. Once I get going, I'm trying to find my own way to the truth that I experienced, but in this other form. And I feel very strongly about that as a writer and as an artist, that I have to find the form, and it has to be the way that I give it to someone I don't know, you know. Yeah. So people, I think it's like when you write into histories that, yes, that involve your family or places that you went through, the degree to which you are trying to be faithful to that is one thing, and the degree to which you're trying to be true to some other aspect of that is another thing, you know. So I'm not to be trusted. Yes. Yeah. And at the same time, my siblings, like especially my younger siblings, have said that they felt like when they read this, that they were able to understand something of our parents that they could not put into words before. You know. So.
Okay.
Other questions?
I think I saw.
One?
Oh.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your talk and for coming today. I actually read your work when I was an undergraduate at UC Irvine, and I've seen your performance at one in Orange County. So
Okay.
It's really nice to see you here.
Hi.
Yeah, so I have a quick question, and that might tie back to the question earlier about sort of what would the younger generation do with this history and this inheritance.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to hear your thought a little bit, because you also mentioned that you think about having this work might be translated into Vietnamese, but possibly for like the Vietnamese and Vietnam public, reading public. And I was wondering, what do you make of the Vietnamese diasporic public as an audience for this translated work, the potential of it, right? Because I see that Vietnamese American authors like yourself, Monique Trung, Vietnam Nguyen, right, have all written this magnificent work in English that really help the second generation, the American public, the international public to understand more about Vietnamese subjectivity and Vietnamese refugees. But I don't seem to see there's a eye toward the Vietnamese diasporic reading public. So people like your parents, people like my parents. So I was thinking, I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that, and perhaps thinking about that in relationship to the work of bridging generations, right?
Yeah. I think that's a great. It's unrealized, but it's not unnecessary, as you're saying, and it's a natural way to broaden, to kind of recognize how far flung we are, and at the same time what is common and recurrent, right? So to trace, like to really map, like to understand, what does it mean to be Vietnamese and Australian, or to be French Vietnamese? What does it mean, and how is it different? How is it similar? And how is it Vietnamese? Right? And eventually, I should love for all of this to wash back into Vietnam and allow for this larger perception of Vietnamese reality beyond the borders of the country, and then to begin to complicate some of how history is remembered from within that country. So that's a long-term thing, but yes, and I think this is a great sneaky way to do it, right? Because it's kind of like, how did we come to be there, and there? And how are the voices resonating off of each other, right? And then, what does it mean to hear them in that ancestral site? right? Because it's ancestral. It's like we ask ourselves, what is our relation to that body of land, body of water? Yeah, I think that's a wonderful future. Yes, and then to ask, like, Cathy's question, how will that future remember April 30th? From all those distant sites. Yeah. Thank you.
Other questions? Now it's on Min's
That's call you.
I was interested in the genre of your multidisciplinary work and how you think your genre. I can imagine a version of the Gangster that, say, is a walking gallery, or like the Emmett Till and the Massacre as a book sort of. So I'm wondering, how does your work, or how do you let the work settle into its genre form? Is it more organic, or is it something that you have to sort of impose first and experiment with before deciding?
It's the latter, usually. I mean, like, I started performing because I had gone to Paris to do a study on French colonial postcards, and which this is one of them. This is a detail from one of the postcards. I started performing because I wanted to see if I could actually be my dad. I just wanted to, like, try. Like, I dared myself. Like, could I be him, So a lot of these explorations begin with questions that I don't know, like, in approaching the story of My Lai, I first wrote it as a short story. I did a short story called The Americans, and it's from the point of view of a U.S. soldier who was there, right? But it's occurring in 2000. Yeah, it's at the Iraq War, right? So it's kind of like, it's about how the wars bleed into each other and all of that. But it's a miniature of the novel. Do you know? So each of the things is just a way for me to feel the material. And the installation came out of this conversation I'd had with a friend where I said, it's as if I want people to walk into the novel. And that's exactly what that is, yeah. But it is very organic, and I work very slowly because I like to feel the different elements within, whether it's within the scene or within the perform, yeah. So it's not preset, no.
We'll take maybe like 1 to 2 more questions. Okay, good for you.
I guess maybe as like a follow-up to my first question.
It's about censorship.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thinking about it now, I think that I feel like it's like a great privilege that like we have access to like the works of all these like diasporic writers.
Yes.
But Vietnamese youths in Vietnam do not have
Yes.
access.
Yes.
So my question is like, how do you think maybe perhaps like Vietnamese diasporic writers should like access those youths, and how should I guess reciprocally like those youths might be able somehow to like access them, like the writers back? I feel like they should also be included in the conversation as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I think because, and I think the work is happening in Vietnam, actually, around, you just have to skirt the censorship, but I think it is happening. It might be coded in certain ways, but it's happening. I think what you're talking, yes, we are quite privileged, to be able to have this access and to speak openly, right, in these ways. But we also know that in Vietnam, people are very aware that there's like an official history and a lived history, and that, so it isn't as if it's completely unwritten or unknown. It might not be written, but it's not unknown. Okay. So I wouldn't underestimate to some degree, like what the awareness is. But it has to do with the exchange, exactly. And as long as there's this political system, you have to be sneaky about how you go about doing the exchanges, and so it can't be perceived as provocative because it will never be allowed to happen. But it doesn't, mean there aren't ways to do it, like in a benign form. Do you know? So it's like what we're talking about are ideas, ultimately, right? We're talking about seeding ideas and ways of seeing. And that can be transmitted in lots of ways, right? Not directly, but still get across. If I, so slant, like kind of, yeah. So long as you have censorship, you're gonna have to find a way that's seeming, like my mother used to send money home, right? When we first came to this country, she used to send money home in toothpaste. So she would wrap the money in like tin foil, and she'd put it into the tubes of toothpaste, right? And it's like that, where I'm like, you find a way. It's just a matter of generationally, yes, getting people steeped and exposed so that they can form their own way to address. Yeah.
Any last
All right.
questions? Otherwise, can we give a hand for Miss Thúy?